I just feel so privileged to be able to speak after such a wonderful time in the presence of God. He's so good, isn't he? He is so good. But my remit this morning is to talk on Genesis 10:11, and it's been kind of subtitled Babylon and the Kingdom. That's what we've been seeing on the sort of the rolling overhead over the weeks. But I have also subtitled it Rebellion, Division and Confusion. Now, I am not going to go verse by verse through both chapters. Do not worry, you are not going to be here until 2:30 in the afternoon. And we're mainly going to be focusing on chapter 11, just the first 9 verses, and just skimming through the other parts. So last week, Sally looked at the story of Noah. And so our chunk of Genesis today picks up when Noah and his family, they're safely on dry land. And although we've only covered a few chapters in Genesis, we have begin to see a little bit of a pattern where sometimes you get a passage like Genesis 1 where it gives like an overview. So Genesis 1 talks about the whole of creation. And then we've got Genesis 2, which picks up in a little bit more detail. It looks about mankind and focuses on a particular area. So we can see already that everything is not necessarily in sort of chronological order at this stage in the Bible. And that is also the case today as we begin to look at Genesis 10 and 11. So Genesis 10, so it's an overview describing the story of Noah's descendants and exactly what's happening with them. It's got several generations, how they increase in number, they begin to fill the earth. And then we've got the next bit. So we've got Genesis 11, 1-9, the Tower of Babel. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. And that's talking about a particular story that happened during this time. So it happened sort of during the time when Genesis 10 was all happening. We've got Genesis 11, this story we're going to be focusing on. And then with the rest of Genesis 11, talks about Shem's family. So we've got the line of Abraham coming in there. But Abraham is for next week, so I'm not going to be dipping into that at all. Okay, so just a few things that I want to just pick up on from Genesis 10 that actually provide a bit of context that are really important to know before we pile into Genesis 11. But I promise we will get on to Genesis 11 quite quickly. So the first thing that we need to be aware of is that the majority of the action in the Bible happens in Israel, Canaan, we call it the Promised Land. But this is happening way before that. So Noah's family are not actually in the Promised Land. They're much further east. They're in sort of an area that I suppose, when I was at school, we called it the Fertile Crescent. So it's the area between the sort of, Heather's nodding, because, and we, even the non-Christian teachers would tell us that that's where, civilization of mankind began. So they got something right anyway. But anyway, that's where they are, between the Tigris and the Euphrates in that particular area, and possibly quite close to where Eden was described as happening, because we know that was between the Tigris, Euphrates, and then 2 other rivers as well. And it's from here that the generations begin to spread out. So the majority of this is about who had which son, and how they all sort of went through. But there is a particular focus on one individual, Nimrod. And if a passage focuses on somebody, then it's always quite important to think about why that's focusing on there. So I'm just going to read that little bit of Genesis 10, and then we're going to think very briefly about this interesting character. So, from verse 8. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and that's why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centuries of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Resen, which is between Nineveh and Calah, which is the great city. Right, I'm just going to now arrange my Bible so it does not fall off. Actually, I might just do that. I don't want it to fall off the stand. That would not be great. Okay, so why does Nimrod get a special mention? Well, so he's the grandson of Ham, the great-grandson of Noah, and his name means, let us rebel. And he certainly lived up to his name. So at first glance, the passage, it looks good, doesn't it? A mighty hunter before the Lord. So you might think, oh, wow, he's going to bring some great game offerings. He's going to be out there hunting away. But then when you begin to read that the first centres of his kingdom were Babylon, that begins to make you think, what's going on here? Because Babylon is mentioned in the Bible, throughout the Bible, as a seat of wickedness. Literally, we know that the Babylonians, they defeated, didn't they, the kingdom of Judah, and they took them into captivity. And then we've been studying Revelation, haven't we, a lot as a church as well. And we know that Babylon is constantly talked about. It is, it's a metaphor for everything that's wicked. Okay, so that's quite interesting. And then Nimrod moves from Babylonia, that area, to Assyria. And the Jewish nation don't really have a great relationship with Assyria either. And he founds Nineveh. Now, if you know the story of Jonah and the whale, which probably a lot of us might have heard about when we were little, but hopefully if you read your Bible, you know that story as well. Jonah knew how wicked Nineveh was. It was so wicked that he was wanted to go right to the other end of the known world to get away from it. So, Nimrod, interesting character. And then what about this mention of a kingdom as well? God didn't ordain Nimrod as a king. So this is a man-made kingdom, not a godly kingdom. And a man-made kingdom is always set up in opposition to God. You're either in his kingdom or you're against it. There's nothing else. And there's a Jewish writer, and unfortunately I forgot to note down his name, but he writes, the ethos of Nimrod's kingdom was to depart from the judgment of the Lord and adhere to the judgment of Nimrod. So Nimrod was not a hunter of game, he was a hunter of men. He was a warlord. He was someone who was a real offence, an offence to the Lord. That's how he's described by a number of commentators. And he set himself up in competition to God, glorifying violence. Trust in Nimrod, don't trust in the Lord. And this is the context at which we're going to look at today's passage. So let's read Genesis 11, 1-9. Interesting enough, can you read that? Is that text big enough? Okay, because we had a little debate in our household this morning about how big the text should be. So I'm not going to say who won. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. And as people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. And they said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used bricks instead of stone and bitumen for mortar. And then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. And that's why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Do my bits of juggling again. I think I need a third hand, really. Okay, now I know that is a little bit difficult to see, but hopefully you might get a little bit idea about where Shinar is. And I've got no idea if I'm saying that right, but hopefully. So it's a fertile area in what is modern-day Iraq, but at that time was called the area of Babylonia, so obviously getting its name from Babylon. And the roots of the word Shinar mean intense negative emotion and the experience of violence, to growl, shake, or be young. So I think you can kind of imagine what kind of a place it was that they were settling in. And the verb, a verb which is really similar in Hebrew, means sharp wit and city. So here we've got a sharp-witted city in a place of negative emotion and violence. Yuck. Okay. So Babel is Babylon. So the event we're looking at, the Tower of Babel, this city, is happening in the original city of Babylon. Now, Babylonian tradition has it that the city of Babylon was founded by the god Marduk, and that the name means gate of God. It's revolting. Gateway to the god Marduk, not gateway to Jehovah. Okay, so quite disgusting, really. And Marduk is in the Babylonian sort of era, he's the god of gods. He's the one who created the earth. Get this. And some of his characteristics were justice, compassion, healing, and fairness. And as I'm saying that, it's making me feel actually physically quite sick. Because there is something which is sat up in direct contrast to our God. Because we know that those characteristics belong to our God, don't they? They don't belong to any other God. No other God can have those characteristics. So it's quite safe to say that these descendants of Noah, only a few generations ago, on from there, are not worshipping Jehovah. And so they decide that they are going to build themselves a city with a tower, which reaches the heavens. They're going to make a name for themselves and to avoid being scattered over the earth. Now, can anyone remember, what did God instruct Noah to do? He was to move out and fill the earth. So we got direct disobedience. Okay, we're going to make ourselves build a fabulous city, and we're going to stay here. So this city is founded directly on rebellion, disobedience, self-sufficiency, pride, and worship of other gods. So not really a great place. So I don't know if any of you are interested in history. I quite like history. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a dig into, was there any sort of physical evidence? Is there any archaeological evidence for this city of Nimrod? And actually, there are no remains there where this original Babylon was built. Later, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was a little bit further north. He built still sort of in that area, but a little bit further north. But there are well-recorded from historians, not biblical historians, but other historians, about bricks and soil being taken from that area by King Saga in about 2000 BC to build his capital city fairly nearby, and also, again, other reports about the reconstruction of a temple at that place as well. So it's a genuine, it's not just a sort of pretty story in the Bible for anyone who thinks, it might just be allegorical. It's actually, it's a real place. Okay, so let's have a little think about Babel. So the passage doesn't, this sort of title, the Tower of Babel, has obviously been added in later. And the passage actually mentions the building of a city with a tower. So why do we focus so much on the tower? Why have we subtitled it the Tower of Babel? What's so significant about the tower? So I wonder what is your mental picture? When someone says Tower of Babel to you, I wonder, what do you think of? So I kind of always thought of the Tower of Babel being like really tall, like some sort of super skyscraper reaching up into, the clouds. But if you want to build something as tall as possible and reach up into the clouds, does it make any sense to build it on a plain? If you wanted to build the tallest thing, get the highest as you can, wouldn't you go up on a mountain? But if you want to show off and make an impression and let everyone around you see how fabulous your tower and your city are, then build it on a plain, because everyone's going to show it. So rather than a tall tower, this is much more likely what the Tower of Babel looked like. So this is called a ziggurat, and it's a multi-story sort of temple tower. And there's been lots of evidence for other ziggurats in that area, so we know that's how they were built. And maybe the Babylonians were thinking, we will build the biggest and best ziggurat around. Let's show everyone how clever we are. We're so technologically advanced. We're clever. We've got it all sorted. Don't mess with us at all. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, what about that phrase, reaching to the heavens? Because this does not look as tall as your first picture at all, does it? Okay, well, the top of the ziggurat, that little bit on the top, I'm pointing there. I should be pointing here, but that's because I'm looking the other way. It's a temple. And whichever god was worshipped by that area was said to descend there to meet with mankind. So the construction goes up, and it does go up to the heavens where the gods are. So we're, often thinking the sort of the literal sense, but this is a spiritual reaching the heavens, a spiritual connecting with the gods. And also this temple being the highest place in the city, it's also a great place to observe the heavens, where you can study your astrology, so your occult, and that makes perfect sense as well, don't we? Because we know that Babylon is famed for the occult practices. There's lots of references in Daniel, and even the wise men we know come from that area, and they were studying the stars. Now, we're not talking about looking at and seeing which is the brightest. We're talking about trying to get control, trying to get look into the future. So something really evil there. So God had intended for his people to be nomadic tent dwellers, to travel with their flocks and herds, to spread out. And every time families got too big and there wasn't enough grazing land, they would sort of divide up. So maybe like your grandchildren would go off to find new areas, and that's how the world was going to be populated in direct obedience to what God had said. There wasn't even stone in that land to build with. God, if he'd wanted people to build a city, he could have done. He could have provided stone. God can do anything, can't he? If he wanted them to build impressive cities, I'm sure he would have put some stone there. But the people in this area decide to ignore that and the calling, go out and fill the earth. They make bricks and what is described as, in different translations, bitumen, tar, or even slime, wonderfully, as mortar. Now, I don't know. I've been trying to imagine, what would a city where you've got tar as mortar look like? It's going to look pretty hideous, isn't it? It's going to be black and dark, really quite unpleasant. Not what God intended. Okay, I'll ignore that bit. I don't think we need that. Okay. So, having planned to build a tower to reach the heavens and invite their god, and we're talking about little g down, the early Babylonians get a little bit more than they bargained for, don't they? Jehovah, the living God, comes down to see the city. Be careful what you ask for. I bet they didn't expect a sort of physical manifestation, actually the incarnate God. It doesn't say he looked at the city. It says he came down, God came down physically, and he did not like what he saw. He did not like it at all. I think it's really interesting if you begin to look at some of the language as well. So look at, if you've got a Bible there, look at the parallels in language between verses 4 and 7. So the Babylonians say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." And the Lord says, "Come, let us go down." And obviously the us is referring to the Trinity. We know that God is triune. I don't think it's sort of just a mistake or a sort of coincidence that the language is the same. The Babylonians are setting themselves up in clear opposition to the Lord. Not a great thing to do. How does the Lord respond? So he sees that if he leaves things as they are, there is limitless potential for depravity, sin. Nothing's going to be impossible if people speak the same language. And he acts. But I love the fact he acts with grace and mercy, doesn't he? He could have called down fire from heaven. He could have wiped them out, couldn't he? But he chooses instead to act with mercy, confuse their language, and scatter the people. And he removes them from that toxic, controlling environment, scatters them over the face of the earth. There's opportunities for families to find their own culture, their identity, their customs, away from the control of Nimrod's kingdom there. Freedom for the people and a chance for God to reclaim that commission. He gave it first to Adam, didn't he? Telling him to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and then to Noah as well. But the people aren't just scattered geographically, are they? They're also scattered linguistically, their languages. So they don't speak the same language, can't understand each other. Can you imagine how frustrating that must have been? Suddenly, you don't understand each other anymore. And Genesis 10:25 describes it this time. So 2 sons were born to Eber. One was named Peleg, which means division, because in his time, the earth was divided. Babylon was also called Babel at this time. So God called it Babel, and it means confusion. It's sort of like a play on words, like a joke, if you like. And I think that's where we get the word Babel from in our language. So lack of trust in God, rebellion, and then rebellion leads to division and confusion. And just a few generations later on, if you look in Genesis 14, you've got rows of kings lined up to fight each other. So these are all from the same family. They're all from the same family, but they've got to the state where they can't understand each other. Understanding is gone, and they are fighting each other. Cooperation is no more. So we are created in the image of God. I hope you believe that. Yeah? Okay, I'm getting a few nods. Good to know a few people are still awake. And we're designed to work cooperatively. God's cooperative. He worked with the Trinity. We see the Trinity working together seamlessly, and we're made in his image. That's how we're designed to work. And even in our sort of post-fall, like our sinful state, we see people trying, don't we, trying to work together and trying to achieve good. But whenever it's man-centered and not God-centered, it is doomed. It's always going to have a limited effect. I was thinking about the UN quite recently, and even putting aside some of the sort of more recent scandal. United Nations, they've been set up because I think they're going to bring all the nations together. Well, that is not going to happen at the moment, is it? The nations are only going to be united when the Lord returns. And when we live in that beautiful, pure city, the New Jerusalem. It's going to be wonderful, isn't it? That is the opposite of Babylon. That is Babylon, Babel reversed. The reversal. No more confusion, no more division. We've got unity and complete understanding. And that is our destiny. That is our future. That is our inheritance. But God, he loves to give us sort of little teasers, little foretastes, doesn't he, of what it's going to be like. So Pentecost in Acts 2. And we see that, don't we? One message, everyone hearing in the same language, common understanding. And that is a precursor. And so we have the gift of tongues, don't we? A precursor to the complete reversal of what happened at Babel. Everyone understanding one message in the same tongues. So what about us? How does this apply to us today? Because that happened a way long time ago. Well, God's the same God, isn't he? Yeah? He's still a faithful, trustworthy, loving God who keeps his promises. I'm getting some nods, some smiles. Good. I hope you believe that. But he's also a righteous and jealous God too. And he expects us to trust him and follow him wholeheartedly, without compromise. Can be hard, can't it? And we can fall into that trap, can't we, of doing things in our own strength. Do did God really say? So we can be just like that, can't we? Just like that early echo from Genesis. And we can be vulnerable to both pride in our own achievements and also to our insecurities as well. So those two things can both play together. Now, it's really easy, isn't it, to look around the world and find organisations who are like sort of doing things in their own strength and are sort of, rebelling against God, even if they may not realise it. They're building their own kingdoms, might have good intentions, and maybe not even thinking about God, not thinking about the rebelling. But we do have to look closer to home as well. And we need to be bold to think about the church. We have to address that. We can't ignore it. And we need to think about the church in relation to this passage. And just be brave, recognise that, firstly, we're not immune to the temptation. Are we? We're not immune. And that we can kingdom build, small k, rather than build his kingdom. Now, whenever I think of kingdom building, I always remember my first job. So I worked as a software engineer, so very, very different to what I do now. And after I'd sort of done my training, I went to a project and I was working on some stuff for Boeing. And I was taken sort of to my area and I was going to do quality control. So I had the really scary job of looking at what everyone wrote and checking that it was okay and that obviously the plane wasn't going to crash because someone had made a mistake. And the first thing you did was you got a desk. And then after you got a desk, the next thing you wanted a back to your desk so that you could have a little bit of privacy and it had a shelf so you could put your books on. And then you wanted a filing cabinet. And then you wanted a spare chair. Because if you had a spare chair, you were important because that meant that someone needed to come and sit and talk to you. And then you could get sort of an extra filing cabinet and lovely stationery and all of these sorts of things. And people even talked about, building their own little kingdom. Now, in that sense, I was one of the few females in that area, so it was quite easy for me to build my kingdom because the guy who ran the stores was a male, and he was want to help you. Nasty, really, thinking about it back now, very young woman. But building a kingdom, we can laugh about it, can't we? But if we're not careful, we can build a kingdom. So any church which ceases to impress people by how wonderful they are, how wonderful the worship is, how cool your youth program is, our youth program, how impressive the building is, that's the spirit of those early Babylonians as well. Now, I'm not saying any things are wrong. I love the fact that we have fantastic worship here. I love the fact that the kids are fighting to come to the Sunday school. Those things are good. And, we're doing it, as long as we're doing it in Jesus' way, that's great. But when we start congratulating ourselves about how amazing we are and stop professing how awesome he is, you can just imagine it, can't you? Jesus looking around and going, okay, you're doing such a great job. I'm not needed. Holy Spirit, come on, let's leave. And joking aside, the picture of the church without the Holy Spirit, without Jesus, is heartbreaking, isn't it? The bride without the bridegroom, it's just a mockery, isn't it? And it can be really easy for us to think, oh, well, the stable isn't like that. We've got a really humble building and we're like really humble people as well. But I just want to share with you a word that I had at our first sort of Friday evening prayer meeting. Now, normally God speaks to me in pictures. So when he gave me a word, and I mean a single word, I was kind of like, oh. And the word that he gave me was pride. And I immediately was like, what's that about, Lord? And what the Lord said to me was actually that this year, as a church, we're going to be vulnerable to the sin of pride. And so we need to watch out. We need to be careful that we are boasting in Jesus and not in our church. I love being part of the stable. I've been here over 30 years. I love my stable family, but I love Jesus more. And we need to make sure that we are never promoting the stable over Jesus. So I'm going to just rest that with you. You can probably see from my face that it's something that goes deep. We need to be watchful, keep our eyes fixed on him, and if we catch ourselves doing that, let's just repent, come back to the Lord, ask his forgiveness, and move on. Okay. And what about personally as well? What about us as individuals? We can worship things, can't we? Anything which takes the place of God in our lives is worshipping. Money, work, family, alcohol, power, control, anything. You can probably, I don't know, you know yourselves, you can probably think about what that thing. That's just the same as worshipping other gods. It's the same spirit as worshipping Marduk. It's just a different god, with a different name. God is a jealous God, and he tells us to have no other gods before him. Okay. And we need to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, with all our souls, and with all our minds. So, are you ready to look in your dusty cupboards? I wonder if you get what I mean by that. So this morning, I woke up really quite early, which on a Sunday, I'm like, why? But it's because God wanted to talk to me. And he gave me a picture, and the picture was of a nice clean house, but that house had some cupboards, some dusty cupboards, which were shut firmly, and no one was allowed to see in those dusty cupboards. Now, I do have areas in my house which I shut the door on and don't really want to show visitors, but I also have areas in my life which are like a dusty cupboard where I don't necessarily want to open and explore. Sometimes maybe I might open the door and shove things in and shut that door. Now, how ridiculous is that? Jesus sees every area of our life, doesn't he? You can't have a dusty cupboard. But seriously, are there areas of our lives that we struggle to trust in? Around your finances, your health, family, job, future? And for me, there are definitely things in my life where areas where I know I'm struggling with trust, and I have to bring them on a daily basis, and I'm going to keep doing that until I've dealt with it, until I have fully trusted Jesus in that area. And I just want to encourage us today, can we open the doors of those cupboards? Can we let the light of Jesus in? Yeah? Let the light flood in any dusty places. And let the cleaning process begin. Okay. So, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. And that's from Proverbs. Our God is a gracious and compassionate God. He's filled with love. He showed such grace and mercy, didn't he, to the wicked people who lived in Babel. How much more will he show it to his children, us? I'm going to ask the band to come back now. I'd like us to spend some time in worship. And as we do that, just allow Jesus to speak to you. And if there are areas in your life you're struggling with, areas you know that you need to lay before the Lord, areas that you know that you're struggling to trust him, areas that maybe he's not God of, if you've got a dusty cupboard, just really want to encourage you, come to the front and get some prayer. Come and get someone to stand with you. And let's trust the Lord wholly and fully. He is a good, good God.